Okay. Looking good, Andrew?
Yeah, looks great.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, wow. I am really inspired by the stories we just heard, and what a great morning. Really appreciate the whole Imagine team and all of our speakers for sharing kind of the latest and greatest science, practical tips and experience, and just opening up and sharing with this community what you're learning. I think uh, one of the things that we've been trying to do with this group is not just bring you the glossy finished success story, but actually show you how the sausage is made and how we get from maybe paralysis of not knowing what to do to truly implementing effective annual grass treatments on the ground. So hopefully you got to see a little bit of that this morning. And I want to thank Sarah, Nancy, and Connor. I know it's not easy for field folks to come and present in front of 200 people, but honestly, it's your stories that are going to resonate the most with a lot of the people on this meeting. And so we thank you for doing that. Andrew and I are the 30,000 foot people, and we're going to just zoom out for a second and remind the group just how far we've come and some of the things we're still working on, in the future here. So just a few short years ago, I came to Brian Mealer and the Imagine group with a pitch and an idea, and that was to start a multi-year effort to raise the education and awareness level of our community in the sagebrush biome to a point where people actually feel comfortable doing annual grass management again. And I've been doing this 25 years, and I can tell you early in my career, there was recognition that invasive annuals are a problem, but a lot of distractions in terms of maybe focusing too much on wildfire prevention as a solution to the problem. And part of it is just, a lot of folks don't treat this until it's too late. And so we're seeing the outcomes of that in terms of larger and more frequent fires. But where I did see truly proactive management was in Wyoming and the work that Brian and his team were doing, going into places long before they were disturbed and heavily infested and doing proactive management. And to their credit, they were doing this at a time, even when some in Wyoming said, we don't have an annual grass problem. And so I've been watching their work for a few years. They've stood up a whole institute for dealing with invasive annuals, but there's also been some really big breakthroughs. And I would say, just in the last 5 to 8 years, our ability to spatially understand and see this invasive problem has really come to the forefront. And you've heard a lot about the tools, the RAP and the spatial tools. That's given us a new appreciation for how and where these problems are changing through time. But we've also got better strategies. I think we've articulated this idea of defend and grow the core. Like it's our battle plan for being effective and proactive. And the final piece is we have better on the ground herbicide tools, multi-year type efficacy in terms of dealing with that annual grass seed bank. And so that critical mass made me and our group much more comfortable with like, hey, we actually have something here that we think could scale and be effective. And so we launched what we called our tech transfer partnership back then with this goal of empowering you with the knowledge you need to defend and grow sagebrush cores. And we think about it in terms of meeting you where you are. Not everybody needs to be the person out there applying the herbicides. Some folks just need that awareness and knowledge to be helpful in grant writing or supporting it from a leadership standpoint. And so we're truly trying to provide a whole suite of events like this one that is more on the awareness to knowledge level of that proficiency pyramid, all the way down to boots on the ground, field workshops, community based efforts like you just heard about to get into the actionable things you're going to do in your place. And it's been a busy few years. We've had 12 events, reached over 1,500 people, um, 20 different states represented in those events, and well over 50 organizations participating in this. So there's truly an all hands on deck approach across private and public lands to move from this conceptual idea of defending your core to what this group has branded defending your core, which is this idea of your local conditions, your local priorities and values combined with the principles of effective annual grass management that you're seeing folks apply as we speak. And so I just want to acknowledge that, it's easy to forget that things are evolving and that we are making progress. I'm just going to tell you right now, it's happening. And I couldn't be more excited to see the community embrace these ideas and start to experiment with this locally in different communities. And at the end of the day, I'm really hoping that we get this map, right, of the West where there are more success stories on this map. There's more stars that say, hey, you want to go talk about invasive annual grass management in Idaho? Call Connor and the folks in Southwest Idaho. They've got some great real world examples. It isn't just small scale plots. We've got thousands of acres where you can see the results on the ground for yourselves. And that's ultimately where this group would like to head over time, is better outcomes, things that we can see and that are real and produce benefits for everybody. But there continue to be a lot of challenges and things that we need to support in helping you make that happen. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here, Andrew, to kind of talk through his perspectives.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I just want to echo the thanks to the folks that participated in this, and particularly those of you that facilitate these local groups in the field getting stuff done. Wanted to talk just briefly about kind of currently what it takes to get things done when addressing invasive annual grasses and looking into the future of what it's going to take to be successful. And this is really about commitment and creativity, which are some of the principles tied to this invasive annual grass partnership. I want to introduce you. This is called the Conservation Readiness Framework, this little Venn diagram here. And these are some ideas from Katie Wolstein and others out of Oregon. And you may have seen other similar approaches to addressing this. Essentially, it's what's the recipe for successful management action or conservation. When we look at this, social capacity. We heard about this, the questions about how do you get a local community engaged and excited about this work? Do you have people that are fired up about invasive annual grasses and want to do something about it? So that's that bubble. Ecological importance. What your conservation management goals are. What you're trying to manage. What you're trying to conserve. What your core is, or in the process of defining what you're trying to protect with your invasive annual grass work. So I think those are pretty straightforward. The conducive administrative conditions, this is often the tricky part. And we've seen already some exchange in the Q&A around NEPA and things like that. That's all part of this bucket. Funding, capacity, agency priorities. I just want to start on this. I'm just going to unpack this very briefly. But, funding, agency priorities, all these things, they have always been dynamic. They are dynamic now, as was referenced by a few folks throughout the workshop here, and they're continue to be dynamic. And so it takes creativity and some grit to figure out how do we keep the gas pedal down and keep winning when it comes to invasive annual grasses. On the agency priorities, and this could relate to funding too, be creative about how you contextualize your work. I think I've seen some really interesting examples. One of the beautiful things about invasive annual grasses is they relate to fire, livestock grazing and forage, wildlife, biodiversity, pollinators, carbon storage, recreation, community safety. There's so many ways to contextualize invasive annual grass management work that might unlock funding and partnerships that are a little outside of maybe your normal wheelhouse. I would encourage you to think creatively about that. One when it comes to funding, I think being pretty flexible and thinking outside of the box, being nimble enough to take advantage of opportunities when they arise. You know, Connor had some interesting examples from Southwest Idaho and how they've been able to tap into sort of the funding of the day. One specific note on this, I just want to make sure people are aware. If you don't know, if you work on public lands, particularly BLM, Department of Interior lands, there's a new wildland fire service that is in place. People are falling into positions. They are all BLM fuels and fire will be completely subsumed into this new agency, and that's in the works as we speak. And leadership is putting in place, division chiefs, things like that. So now is the time to get to know those folks, understand their priorities, build relationships. If you don't know where, start with your local BLM staff. Their badge probably changed in the last few weeks to Wildland Fire Service if they're in the fuels and fire areas of work. So I'd really encourage you to think about that if you do work on BLM lands. It's pretty important timing for those of us working on this issue to get involved there. Last thing is just capacity. You know, we've heard about challenges with, particularly among federal partners around hiring freezes, things like that. There's a lot of creative ways to fill capacity, shared positions, fund pools, things like that. Partner positions, that's something my organization spends a lot of time on, is funding non-federal positions. You heard two of our positions that we support heavily. Connor and Nancy here this morning. Pheasants Forever does this. Sometimes conservation districts can hold positions. There's so many ways to get that work done, to get the bodies on the ground. You know, reach out to folks with sort of regional or national perspectives to get some ideas on addressing some of these things. These are all kind of complicated challenges. This is beyond the technology and science, kind of the core meat of this partnership. But I think we all recognize that if we don't work well in addressing these topics, we're never going to be as effective as we could be. Before I hand it back to Claire, to wrap this up, and Jeremy, feel free to chime in if you have other thoughts here, but you know, we're in this together. Echoing what Jeremy said, you know, there's resilience in our relationships, connections, knowledge sharing. What's happening even in this event right now is powerful. The knowledge sharing going on in the chat and the Q&A. So, you know, use your friends, build new relationships, and I think we can find a lot of ways to keep the gas pedal down and be really effective in scaling up and targeting invasive annual grass work. So, Jeremy, do you have any final thoughts before we flip to Claire?
More of a word of encouragement to be nimble and resilient right now. You know, when we sit down with groups, it's pretty apparent that there's a lot of change happening, and that can be, you know, stifling in terms of moving forward. But I think if you can just realize that there's always been these kind of disruptive periods in government and conservation programs and funding and staffing, and to the extent that you can lean into your partnerships, you're going to be more successful. And there are a community of us around you that would like to be able to help. And so, you know, on the NRCS side, I'm here and can do my job to bird dog issues and help you make sure that support ends up in the right place. And Andrew and the joint venture on the BLM side, and then all of our other state and federal partners and tribal partners. I think just remember that this principle may be the most important one when it comes to managing this problem, but we're all going to have to step up and find a way to contribute. So we are very aware of that going forward into the future, and are ready to help make it happen on the ground with you. So with that, Claire, we'll turn it back over to you.